Welcome everyone to the tax filing workshop. Just as a full word of disclosure, this is not the recorded live session from March 29th, 2023 as the slide suggests. Unfortunately, we ran into an issue with the recording. However, because we did promise to record the session and make that available, and because I understand that taxes can be entirely confusing, I have elected to record a separate version of the workshop just to kind of help people understand the basics of tax filing in Canada, what sort of tax documents you need to gather in order to fill out your return, what tax forms to fill out and how exactly to fill them out, and generally just trying to make the process a lot less intimidating. With that said, how do you file your taxes? Well, the meme answer is you don't, and then you get arrested for tax evasion. In all seriousness though, unless you owe a large sum of money in taxes, you are likely not going to get arrested for tax evasion, despite what, say, movies or the internet will tell you. Likely what will happen is you will get contacted by the Canada Revenue Agency, the CRA, and just continually get pestered in order to pay your taxes and file your tax return. And it can get to the point where they will literally go to your employer and ask them to garnish a portion of your paycheck away in order to pay off as taxes. So do your taxes. In my opinion, I really think that the whole process of filing taxes boils down to a simple 3-step process. Step 1, you're going to collect all your tax documents and slips to kind of certify how much income you've made throughout the year, how much you've paid in things like tuition or donations, and that sort of thing. The second thing you're going to do is you're going to fill out all the necessary forms and some supplementary forms that you will need in order to complete your return. And then once you have completed your return, you can move on to step 3, which is to send your return off to the Canada Revenue Agency. And depending on your situation, you're either going to be able to wait for your refund or pay your balance owing as necessary. So for today's session, we're going to be kind of going over, first off, the tax slips that you're going to need in order to file your taxes, and then in terms of the tax forms that you're going to need to fill out. I've split them into 2 sort of distinct categories. The first category I would consider essential tax forms, and these are things that no matter what your situation is, likely it is going to be that you will need to fill all these tax forms out, and it's a good idea to do so. The secondary tax forms are tax forms that are probably not going to apply to all students. It really is going to depend on your situation. However, I leave them here because they are incredibly common, and it is something that it might be worth looking into if you think it applies to you. And then considering that this is Waterloo and we have a nice thing with called co-op, sometimes people go to the US or even internationally for work. I'm going to be covering the case where you have foreign income and you need to report that on your taxes. I'm also going to cover the case because we have a lot of international students. We might have some, I believe we did have some of the audience during the live session, the special case of international students and how you file your taxes there. As a very quick note of disclaimer, I am not, and I do not claim to be a tax expert. I have years of experience filing my own taxes, and I also have a father who has a small tax business in helping people file their taxes. Please consult with a professional for more complicated affairs. I try to explain the basic level of tax knowledge in this workshop. It's really only meant to scratch the surface and kind of give you the understanding you need to do the majority of your personal taxes. No business tax, no self-employment tax. Don't try to maximize your credits. Please consult with a professional. And I have gone ahead and taken some of the main questions from the live session of the workshop, and I will try to answer them throughout the time here. Again, this is a basic level workshop targeted primarily towards students and especially targeted towards filing in Ontario. The process, however, is going to be similar across most of the provinces, the notable exception being Quebec. But long story short, please consult with a professional if you have any more complicated matters on taxes that go beyond the scope of today's workshop. And with that, we're ready to move on to step 1. Step 1 of doing your taxes is to acquire your tax documents. These are your tax slips that certify, again, your income and how much you've made throughout the term, throughout the year, right? And they are usually going to be available around mid to late February. There's two main ways in which you can get them. Number one, the most common way is to coordinate with your employer or school, etc., in order to get the forms directly, and you can get them by mail or email or digital download. For example, if you're trying to get tax forms from Waterloo, usually you can just go onto your Quest account and just download those forms directly. If it's your employer, you might have to talk to them and try to see if you can get your forms emailed or mailed, and go from there. An alternative way is that because in Canada, employers are required to submit all tax slips to the CRA for processing, that is something that you can do, is actually download those tax slips from your account on the CRA website. The only catch is that you have to have a CRA account, and that requires you to have filed taxes once. I am not going to go over the specifics of what to do if you are locked out of a CRA account. You can't make one, you can't access one. I would contact the CRA directly about that, because every situation is different. So the main tax documents you will need for filing your taxes is you are going to need, you have a T4 slip per employer. The T4 slip is the slip that talks about your employment income, so how much money you made throughout the tax year, and also how much in income tax, pension plan, CPP, or employment insurance, EI, that you have paid out throughout this tax year. And again, you're going to have one T4 slip per employer. You're also going to have a T2202 slip. This is talking about tuition fees and how much you pay into that. This is going to be per school. However, I am going to assume that for the majority of us, you're only going to have one T2202 slip. Any other income that you have obtained that isn't employment income is likely going to be reported on what we call the T4A slip. And so this will cover things like scholarships and RESP payouts. The T4A slip is pretty much the none of the above slip, and kind of just explains all the other income that you have. Then, depending on your charitability, you may also have some donation receipts. Again, this is not an exhaustive list, and it would represent the main tax slips that a typical student would have. I would consult with a professional if you have any additional tax slips that you need to report. And so with that, I am just going to quickly show off an example of some tax slips. So first off here is the T4 slip. We can see that it shows off how much employment income you have, your contributions to the pension plan and the EI, and notice that we have each line has a number associated with it. This is the box number. These numbers are your best friend when it comes to filing your taxes, because it is very much comes down to putting the right number into the right line. And we'll see as we go into the tax forms that it will show off just exactly how you're going to put the numbers together. And again, for T4s, you're going to have one for employer. So for my case, for example, I did 2 jobs in this recent tax year in 2022, and so I have 2 tax slips. The thing with taxes is that with T4s, T4As, and any additional things, box numbers add up. So if I'm reporting the total employment income I have, I would add up this $1,116.18 and add that to my $17,684.89. Moving on, we have the T4A. This is talking about other incomes such as pensions, retirement, annuity, grants, scholarships, RESP payouts. Most other income that you're going to get is likely going to come from a T4. Again, consult with a professional if you have any other questions. Next, we have the T2202 slip. This is just the slip that certifies how much you have paid in tuition to a particular school in the given tax year. So, for example, I've paid just under $16,000 to the University of Waterloo in 2022. Quite a lot. And lastly, I have a donation receipt, because I did my donations to the Refund and all that sort of stuff. I'm not going to judge you if you opted out of these donations. I don't blame you. But if you do have donations either to the university or to another charitable organization, you would get a tax receipt for income tax purposes. And we'll see as we go on later in the workshop just exactly where you're going to file all of these. So with that, that is the main step 1. Step 2 is filling the forms out. Again, this is, I think, the hardest part, and I think what really gets people intimidated about taxes, because I will admit, it is scary, it is confusing. But honestly, most of the boxes and lines on your slips and on your forms are not going to apply to your situation. Half the battle is honestly figuring out what lines are relevant to your particular situation, and then taxes at that point just become a case of fill in the blanks. Right? One thing I can recommend to make the process a lot easier is to make sure before you even begin that you have all your tax slips in order. It makes the process a lot easier, it reduces errors later on, and frankly, it makes it a lot easier that you don't have to start over if, say, you forgot about a T4, because a lot of things are going to kind of cascade. So it's easier to just start with everything at the beginning and go in one take. Obviously, and I don't blame you if you use tax filing software, it's a lot easier if you do so, mainly just because you can punch in the numbers of the slips and then kind of go from there. For the purposes of this workshop, I will be showing the process on the fillable forms that you can download from the CRA website. And so this is the general form filing roadmap. And so the main form that we are going to be exploring today is the Federal T1 Jacket. The Federal T1 Jacket is the main form that everyone fills out in order to kind of report how much they're supposed to pay in income tax and CPP and EI, how much credits they have from various things like donations and tuition or just grants that the government gives you. And most of the things that you're going to need to fill out are just going to be offshoots of the T1 Jacket. So for example, we have T1 steps 1 through 6, which talk about identification, total income, net income, taxable income, federal tax, and refund or balance owing. And as you can see, we have 3 offshoots here, considering Schedule 8, the CPP overpayment, Schedule 11, tuition credits, and the provincial tax ON 428. We will be going over these forms as we get to them. And what really helps is that these steps actually are shown on the T1 Jacket, as we shall see right now. So as you can see, this is the T1 Jacket, and it shows you exactly each step here. So step 1 is honestly the easy step. It is the identification and other information. This is just giving you your personal information as to where exactly you live, who you are, what's your social insurance number, marital status, and all that kind of stuff. As you can see, I've filled this out in advance just to kind of make things a lot easier and kind of allow us to speed up a little bit. The 2 things that I will go ahead and point out is for international students. One thing you'll want to make sure is pay attention to the Elections Canada section. If you have Canadian citizenship, yes or no, check the corresponding box. And for students that have that foreign income, whether that be through working in the US or otherwise, you'll want to take a look at this box and understand how much income you've had or property throughout the tax year in 2022, right? This box is going to determine if you need to take the additional step that you need to do when we get to the US income section of the workshop. Again, we're going to take this slowly. With that, we can move on to step 2. Step 2 talks about the total income that you have, right? And again, as a resident of Canada, you need to report your income from all sources inside and outside of Canada. So, as you can see here, we have a lot of lines here that are going to kind of explain a lot. But again, how I see this is there's like a few main sections that you need to understand. You just need to take a look at the descriptions of each line and kind of get an idea for what you're probably going to take, right? These lines on the far right are kind of just baselines. These are just the things that you're going to do math on, and then these other lines on the side are mostly just they're mostly just like kind of side offshoots for kind of other things that you might need to do sub calculations for. For example, down here we have a whole section for self-employment income, which you would just do some small math in here and then add up the total in the full section. But as we can see already, a lot of these benefits are probably not going to apply to us. So we're probably not going to have any commissions. We're probably not going to take any old age security or pension benefits. We probably don't have any way to get the universal child care benefit. We probably did not take employment insurance, that sort of things. And in fact, for this example, the only line that's going to matter is this very first one, the employment income, which as it says, it tells you, is box 14 of all T4 slips. So again, what you're going to do is you're going to go to each T4 slip, you're going to add up the total income from both slips and put the corresponding number into this first box. I've already done the math ahead of time, so for my example, I have 18,801.07 total income. And the nice thing is, like I said, for this example and for most applications, you're probably not going to fill out anything else, so you can literally just copy and paste the number into the next step. I would like to mention real fast the other income specify line. This line is likely going to be where your income from the T4A slip is going to come into play. However, with the T4A slip in particular, you want to be careful as to what income it is reporting. Most income on the T4A is going to be stuff like RESP, sick leave, or lump sum, that kind of stuff, right? So for example, if you got a payout from the RESP, let's say I got a $5,000 payout from the RESP, I would put 5,000 here, and I would specify that this is an RESP payout, right? The thing to keep in mind is what box your income is being reported in, because there is a very special case in which you do not need to report the number on your T1 jacket. And that is the case where you have box 105. In box 105, this usually talks about scholarships and grants and that sort of thing for use for tuition. The thing to know about box 105 is that a lot of these are probably going to be non-taxable grants. That means you will not pay taxes on these grants, and so to put them on your T1 jacket on your tax return is useless. And so in my case, I got 11,680 tax-free as grants, and so I am not going to put that on my T1 jacket here. If I did have my T1 jacket and I did have the 5,000 as explained earlier, then again I would just do the math and add these two numbers up to get 23,801 something. So that is the general easy rule of thumb to talk about when it comes to the T4A and this line 13,000. However, again, if you have any further questions and this just explanation does not fully answer the questions needed for your situation, please consult with a professional. And again, I don't have any self-employment income or any of these other sort of things, so I'm just going to go ahead and copy these numbers into the equals. The thing to note as well is that a lot of these lines at the end of the sections are going to be lines that you're going to need to refer to in later sections. So it's a good idea to keep track of these numbers going forward. And in fact, for example, in step 3, net income, it actually tells me to enter the amount from the previous line. This does get confusing because there are two line numbers. Frankly, this is just going to be talking about this is really the line number, and then this is the box number, more likely. But generally speaking, you can kind of see what they're trying to intend on enforcing, especially when they have this number directly preceding line 31. So, like I said, you can just go ahead and copy paste that. This section is a section that is probably not going to apply to most students, again, because it talks about things like pension adjustment or RRSP, retirement savings plans, disability supports, childcare expenses. There is one box in which it may actually apply, and that is box 22 to 15. And this is for deductions for enhanced contributions to the pension plan on employment income. And it says here even to complete Schedule 8, which is a very nice thing. And so let's move on to our first offshoot. Offshoot number 1 is the Schedule 8 Canada Pension Plans, Contributions, and Overpayment. Long story short, the formula for the pension plan and how much people are supposed to pay into it is slightly broken. And so there is an instance where people are potentially paying too much into it. And this seems to apply to most people. And so it's in their best interest to really fill out Schedule 8 in order to kind of understand how much you've paid into the pension plan and go from there. A lot of this is introductory material as to why this form exists. Right, and then you can just go from here to kind of talk about where exactly, right? So again, this is all just introductory information, talks about if this form is for you, and then this actually will tell you as well what parts of this form you're going to need to complete. And generally speaking, for students, the only parts that you would need to fill out as a student are parts 2 and 3, which would determine the number of months of pension contribution and then reporting your income to then do the calculations. So if we move over, part 2 is determining the number of months for how much you applied. You were supposed to contribute to the Canada Pension Plan. In most cases, 99% of cases, and it even tells you, enter 12 on line A, because it's saying that this would apply for the entire year. For students, the only thing that would likely apply is this first line, in which you turned 18 years old in 2022. However, for this, I'm going to assume it is 12, and in fact, for my example, it is 12. And then for part 3, you're going to want to make sure take a note of this line in the row in the table, and this will kind of help us put in where the numbers that we need to for this next slip. I'm not going to go over the specifics of what exactly this form is asking you to do. I'm just going to go ahead and kind of explain what numbers you need to put in what boxes. So, for example, here it's telling you to use the table to enter how much you were supposed to do. So, again, maximum CPP pensionable earnings using the table. So we have 12, and the maximum is $64,900. Oh. So we can just put that in here. And one nice thing as well is that for things like this, there is a maximum value. So if you calculate something and you get something that's more than the maximum value, you've likely done something wrong, and that's a nice way to kind of do a sanity check to make sure things are kind of going right. At least you haven't over-calculated stuff. All right. In this box, it tells you even to enter the total from box 26 of all your T4 slips. And again, box 26, sorry, is going to be this box right here and right there, right? And so all you're going to do is, once again, add up the numbers, and go ahead and enter that amount into this box. And 9 times out of 10, it's actually going to match the income that you have on this part of the T1 jacket, because it's just talking about how much income was eligible for CPP contributions. Most income, I believe, is not going to be exempt from this payment, so it's not really something that I would kind of be worried about. Again, consult with an individual, professional, if you have any questions. Once again, follow the instructions, enter whichever is less from 1 or 2, and I believe 18,000 is less than 64,000. Enter the maximum exemption based on the amount above, which according to the table, maximum basic exemption for 12 months is $3,500, which is in fact the maximum, so we know we've done something correct. And then we see that we have the signs here that tells us to do the subtraction here to see how much we are actually supposed to contribute. So for me, it is 15,301.07 as follows. And this is basically just to say that, you know, your first $35,000 of income does not count towards CPP contributions. Moving on to the next step, right, we're going to enter the total contributions from box 16 of all your T4 slips. And again, that's going to be adding up the numbers from both slips in order to get kind of how much you need, right? So for me, I paid $969.67. One thing that can happen is if you aren't making enough income, sometimes your employer will actually elect to not deduct the CPP or EI ahead of time. Usually this doesn't happen. However, I have heard of it happening before. So that is just something to keep in mind, is that you might not have that box filled depending on if this is like a part-time job. So for example, this is my UW tax slip. I think I made enough that I am going to be contributing to the CPP and EI, but it's something to consider based on kind of the fact that this was a part-time job. This was at the C&D, for example. And so now we're going to be able to kind of do the additional math. So for example, take the amount from line 6, and we apply it here, multiplying by the specified percentage. And again, I've done the math ahead of time just to kind of speed this up a little bit. And so this is now kind of splitting this up into two main types of CPP contributions: base, and enhanced. Generally speaking, it's not really something that matters. It's just something. It's not that it doesn't matter. It's that there's just two main types. I'm not going to get into the specifics of that right now. The point is, we can now take these numbers, and put them there to see how much we're actually supposed to pay in base and enhanced. So this section is talking about how much we actually paid. This section here is asking how much we were supposed to pay, which for my case is going to be $757.40 in base and $114.76 in enhanced. That means that I was supposed to pay $872.16 in CPP for 2022. If I take that from this amount, again, the amount from line 6 and the amount from line 11, and then I can go ahead and enter the amount, and I see that I've overpaid by $97. That's a good chunk of money. And this is something that will likely apply for a lot of students. And so I recommend to fill out the Schedule 8. And now we also see that there are instructions here on where exactly to put these numbers. So for example, line 3800, I'm going to enter the the lesser amount of either line 7 or line 9. So in this case, it'll be line 9. And I'm going to enter that on both 3800 and territorial form, provincial or territorial form 428, line 58240. We will get to these lines when we get there. You're also going to enter on line 22215 the lesser of either line 8 or line 10, which looks like it's line 10 in this case, and I'm actually going to take that right now because this line was the line that we used to kind of offshoot over to this form. And then on line 44800, if the amount on line 14 is positive, in which case it is, we're going to enter this amount onto this line. And one thing to note as well is that we see that it does have instructions on telling you if your amount is negative, enter 0. The government is not going to tell you to pay more into CPP if it is calculated that you didn't pay enough into it. I don't think they have the capacity for that. Moving on. So like I said, because we kind of went off on this offshoot from the line 22215, I'm going to enter the lesser of either line 18 or line 10, which in this case is line 10 at 114.76. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that, return to my T1 jacket, find the line 22215, and put that together. Again, this is just talking about extra items that are going to be used to potentially deduct from your total income to become your net income. And so this is the only thing that applies as like the sub calculation. And so the net income before my adjustments is 18,686.31, at least in this case. And then finally, we can go ahead and put this number directly into the net income, because I'm going to assume that you didn't get any amounts for benefits like employment insurance, or you get and I am going to also assume you did not get a pension. And so now we have our net income. We can now move on to the next page. So now that we have the net income that we were supposed to have, we can now move on to what is the taxable income in step 4. So this is income that you might have gotten from places that do not pay tax and are specifically because you don't pay tax, so you aren't necessarily going to pay the tax on this full amount. However, for most students, I'm going to assume this section does not apply. If we take a look, this is just talking about things like capital losses, northern residence deductions, Canadian Armed Forces deduction. Most of these situations I am going to assume do not apply to students, and so I'm just going to take this number and put it straight directly into here. We're now ready to move on to step 5, which we see is split into some sub-steps. So step 5 is federal tax. This is where we're going to calculate how much we were actually supposed to pay in taxes. So like we said here, so as we follow the instructions, we see that we need to enter the amount from line 2600 into here, depending on and into this corresponding column. So I see here that line 2600 is 50,000 or less, so I can go ahead and put that in. And then if we do the math, again, deducting from 0, we get the same amount. 15% of this amount is $2802.95 in this example, and we don't have any additional tax we're paying, and so this is the tax that we're supposed to pay. And it says here as well, enter the amount from this line on the line 116 and then continue. Generally speaking, I would recommend, if you're doing this for the first time to kind of, as that you go along, like look at what lines they're telling you to put things on and put them in as you go. For the purposes of this workshop, I'm trying to make things a lot easier by taking a very linear path, and so I'm not going to follow these instructions. One question that will get asked is how do the tax brackets work? Is your income tax at is your entire income tax at the tax bracket in which you supplied? And the answer is no. If you have, for example, $75,000 in income, your entire $75,000 is not getting taxed at 20.5%. That is incredibly silly. What happens in this case is the first 50,000 in that is going to be taxed at the lower 15% rate up to that maximum. So for 50,197, the maximum tax is going to be 7529.55. So you're going to pay the maximum amount of tax there, right? Anything in excess to the next bracket is then assessed to the next tax bracket. So, for example, for 75,000, the remaining 25 or so thousand is going to get assessed at 20.5% tax. And so it's kind of more tiered and not so much entirety of tax. So don't fall for what people will tell you that don't take the raise, don't do more overtime, you're going to get taxed at the higher tax bracket. That's not how tax brackets work. Progressive, that's, I believe, the word. They are progressive tax brackets that are going to tax based on how much income you've made and not based on the total income. Moving on. We're going to move on to part B, which is the tax credits. So this is the part where you get to tell the government, hey, I've done all this stuff throughout the year. I think I shouldn't have to pay taxes on a lot of things. And so if we go ahead on that, if we start here, so right here is the basic personal amount. Make sure you claim this, because this is essentially the government saying that the first $14,000 is tax-free. And once again, for student purposes, I'm going to assume that this first thing applies, in which you have made $155,000 or less, which means $14,398 goes into this box. And we see here, if you are really making bank with $220,000, you're going to enter a smaller amount. If you are somehow making enough money that you fall in between these two, and you need to use the federal worksheet to calculate the amount to enter, first of all, what kind of co-op job are you working? And secondly, definitely do consult with a professional on that. And again, as we go through the boxes, we're going to see that a lot of these boxes don't really apply generally to students. We don't really have spouses or caregiver amounts, and so we can go ahead and carry the amounts forward. Going over to this side section, we see here that this is talking about the contributions. And again, we see that this is on Schedule 8, so you'll need to complete Schedule 8 anyway. And so through employment income, and we can see here, this is line 3800, which we see on the Schedule 8. We were told to enter this lesser amount of either line 7 or line 9, which in this case is 757.4. So I'm going to go back to my T1 slip and put that there. Here is the employment insurance amount, premiums, how much you've paid in EI. And this one's simpler. This is just adding up all your box 18s from all your T4 slips. So again, adding up all your box 18 amounts. So for my case, the number here is 297.06. Then the next thing you're going to need to do is the Canada employment amount. You're going to enter the lesser amount of either this or lines 1 and line 2, which in most cases, the number applied here is 1,287. Line 1 plus line 2 is really if you're making a very low amount of income, and so it's not really something that's going to really matter, because lines 1 and 2 are right at the beginning of the tax jacket, in which you're kind of reporting the total income you've had. So we're going to assume for these purposes that this amount applies, and generally that's what it is. And again, there's not much else that applies here. We don't have home buyer's account, adoption expenses, digital news subscriptions. Again, generally things that don't apply. And so we see that for this subsection, I have $2,341.46 in tax credits. And so if we add the lines up, we get $16,739.46, which isn't too bad, right? We can go ahead as well, and kind of put this into the next equal sign because we don't have any disability amounts. Then we move on to the next section, and we see tuition, education, and textbook amounts complete Schedule 11. So this is the second offshoot that we're going to take here. And so let's move on now to the Schedule 11. So the Schedule 11 is just talking about how much you paid in tuition credits and how much you're going to get in, how much you paid in tuition and what you're going to get back in credits that you can use against your taxes. This is stuff that you're going to be also able to use and carry forward throughout each year. And actually, one thing I will note is that in box 1 here, this is talking about unused federal tuition, education, and textbook amounts from your notice of assessment from the previous tax year. So in this case, for the 2022 tax year, you're going to look at the notice of assessment from 2021. The notice of assessment is really just a tax document that you get after you file your taxes that certifies how much in taxes you paid, how much credits you have that carry forward to the next year, and basically your refund and all that kind of stuff. For the purposes of this workshop, I did get a new set of documents prepared, and so I don't have anything to put in this box. However, you likely will have something, especially if you are an upper year student. You likely will have tuition amounts that you are going to be able to put into this box 1. Again, you can get your notice of assessment through the CRA website, or if you're a little kind of confused here as to what exactly to put here, I would consult with a professional. So now again, we're going to go over to here and see. So we're going to start here to explain the eligible tuition fees paid to educational institutions. So we can go over to the T2202 form, and we see here that this box 23 here tells us the eligible tuition fees, part and full-time, those both apply, and how much you paid for the term, so, or for the year. So for example, 15,945.45 is my amount. This subsection here is talking about the Canada Training Credit. I believe this is something more so for trade schools and not so much for engineering co-ops, so this section is likely not going to apply. And so again, we can just carry forward the amounts. Amounts accordingly, because we likely are not going to have any foreign educational institutions. If you went on exchange and you did pay things like this, again, I would consult with a professional. Next, we're gonna kind of over to this next section, and we see that we have the amount here from line 2600. And so if we go back, like I said, a lot of these lines at the end of each section are going to be referred to a lot in following sections. So I'm going to go ahead and take this number and put it here, because I see that, I see that it's less than the $50,000 that it is saying. If I then take the amount from line 99 of my return, which is this amount here, we see that I have $1,946.85. What this calculation has essentially done is it's saying this is the amount of tax This is the amount of taxable income that you have, but this is how much of credits that you get that is basically tax-free because of all their credits. And so what this has done now is it's saying that there is $19,000 left that needs to get credited out. And so now we're going to go ahead and enter this into the next step. We see that whatever is less is either this amount or the line 13, because it tries to use the older tax credits first. So then now we see that the amount of credits that we've claimed for the year is the 1,946, which is enough to kind of get us to break even on the tuition, on the taxes. And then you're going to want to make sure you scroll down to the second page of this, which is just this section here is just to make sure that you're able to carry forward your tuition amount that you didn't use for the next year. So for example, I have 15,000 that I used this year, or that I got this year in credits. I'm only using 2,000 of it, so I want to make sure I'm able to carry the remaining 14,000 to the next month. So again, we can go ahead and enter the amounts from lines 10 and 17 of the previous page, and we see that the amount that we have unused is 13,998.60. So pretty much 14,000 even. And then this section here is if you want to transfer your amounts either to, say, you have a spouse, or you want to transfer tuition credits to your parents. Generally speaking, I don't necessarily think this is going to apply to most people, and so the total unused amount is going to get fully carried forward to future years. And so if we go back to here, we see that to go back here, all we need to do is enter this amount back on line 32,300 on our return, which again was the line that we used to kind of offshoot, over to the Schedule 11. And so as we move back along, we see that our total amounts here are 18,686.31 in credits so far. This subsection talks about medical expenses, which I'm going to assume usually doesn't apply to most people. And so if we then carry the numbers forward, we see that the non-refundable tax credit rate gives us 2802.95 in tax credits, which we notice is the exact same as the amount of taxes that we're supposed to pay. So we're already breaking even when it comes to how much we were supposed to do in terms of credits. We're going to take this amount and enter it from the next page. From line 73, we're going to enter this amount, which in this case just so happens to be this amount, hence why I almost entered the wrong amount in. Then, once again, if we go through everything, a lot of these are not going to really matter. For example, federal logging, income earned outside of Canada, tax carryover, split income. So most of the time, we're going to be able to kind of just carry the numbers forward. Oh, this goes here actually, because we enter the line, we add the lines here, and we have nothing. The amount from line 3,500, is here. We're going to enter that there into here, and we see that we're supposed to pay $0 in taxes, which is great. And again, with all the other tax credits, we likely don't have any other taxes that are going to apply, and then no sort of tax credits from contributions to political donations or sponsored funds. And so we see that to end step 5, we have net federal tax of $0. Moving on to the final step of the T1 jacket is step 6, which is where we're going to calculate how much you're going to get back in refunds or balance. So again, we're going to be taking a look at, we're going to carry the number from the previous line forward into this section. Then we're going to see that these sections are probably not going to apply to us because we have no employment insurance or self-employment. And then we see this section, the provincial or territorial tax. So this is where you're going to complete and attach the provincial and territorial form 428. So for Ontario, that is going to be the ON 428, and the easy way to know which form you need to file if you're filing from a different province is just to kind of use the 2-letter abbreviation of that province and then find the corresponding something 428. So for example, Alberta would be the AB 428. And so let's move over to the Ontario 428. And we see here that already we know that this is provincial tax because this is a pink background as opposed to the blue background of the federal T1 jacket. And I'm going to go back up to line 2600 because that is the first step. And we see here that this step is identical to the tax step over on the federal form. And so I am mostly going to breeze through the details here. And again, start by claiming your basic personal amount. We have nothing really for spouse or common law or dependents. We did pay into CPP and employment insurance, so those are things that we can enter here. And then we add the numbers up. Again, carry the numbers forward. And if we continue on as well, one thing that I will mention is that we see that there is a similar line here from the Schedule 11 for your tuition amounts. Unfortunately, most provinces these days do not allow you to gain credits on new tech tuition amounts that you pay. They're only allowing you to claim things from previous years. And so usually you're not going to necessarily be able to fill out and the Ontario S11 to actually get money here. And so I'm not going to be going over that. And so once again, we can just carry all the numbers forward. We don't have medical expenses. And then going by the non-refundable tax credit rate, I have this much. Donations and gifts is only going to work here if this number is less than how much you paid in. Hold up. Actually, hold up on that, actually. Schedule 9 with donations and gifts is just weird because donations and gifts kind of works the same way as tuition, except that the tuition applies first. So if you have any donations and gifts, but you aren't able to apply them for that tax year because you've hit the threshold of equilibrium, then you're going to have to carry that forward to the next years. And you'll need to complete Schedule 9 accordingly in order to actually claim those. So this is an instance where you're going to need to keep your receipts accordingly. This is something, honestly, that it's best to talk to a professional, and we will go over this again when I get over to the secondary tax forms. I know this has been very long. But again, we can go ahead and carry the numbers forward. I've had none in donations and gifts. So then we take the taxable income that we have. And then again, going forward with the credits. And so we see so far that I have $327.79 not accounted for. If I can actually type this, apologies. And then no split income. There is no tax carryover. And then going on as well, there is no surtax, there is no dividend tax credit. A lot of this really is going to be just carrying numbers forward. And then the next thing is just entering the Ontario tax reduction. This is basically the province of Ontario has made it easy to show that you can claim the tax reduction. And really this is probably just going to be something that is going to be very simple because there's likely no dependent children. You can enter this and double it. And so we see that the tax reduction that we have is $186.21. And so far, as we calculate this, we are left with the final amount here of $141.58. Finally, we move on to these steps where we again carry the number forward. This is the low income individuals and family credit, LIFT credit. You are supposed to complete a schedule ON 428A, which unfortunately I did not prepare in time for this workshop. However, in most instances, you're likely going to be able to get the, I believe, maximum amount of $875. Because your income is likely greater or less than $32,500 for the year, and so basically being below that amount allows you to claim the full $875. Again, make sure you complete this schedule. I do not have it for this demonstration. And then finally, the thing you need to consider is the Ontario Health Premium. But again, we see that the taxable income is a lot less. If we go back, the taxable income is $18,000, which is less than $20,000, and so we don't need to pay any Ontario Health Premium, and so we see that the total tax we need to pay in Ontario is $0, and we can go ahead and enter this on line 42,800 of our return. So if we return back to the T1 jacket, we get that much. Finally, we get to the home stretch. We're going to carry forward the amount once again. Then we take the total income tax deducted for each year. For the year, again, this is going to be box 22, sorry, of all your T4 slips. So in my case, 3,313 across both. And you can see here, this is an example of how sometimes boxes are not going to be filled on a T4. As you can see, I've made little enough income that they decided to not bother with deducting taxes here. And then once again, we can kind of just go through all of this as well. The only two things that are likely going to apply here for students are the CPP, QPP overpayment, which again, that's going to go back to this line, 44,800 from line 14 if it's positive, which we did have here. And then, depending on your situation, you might also have an EI overpayment. We will go over that form really quickly. And so finally, we see that I have a total of just about $3,100. And so if I enter that in, I see that obviously I have a negative number. And if I have a negative number, that means I have a refund, which I can then put into this box here. If you have a balance owing in which your amount is positive, unfortunately you would put it here as well. And then from there on out, all you will need to do is just sign your signature there, put your telephone and date if necessary, and that is basically the basics of the T1 jacket, which is, again, the main thing you're going to be using for your taxes. With the hard part out of the way, we will go on to the secondary tax forms. So these are forms that are a good idea to fill out for an additional refund and are going to apply in some cases. Again, I would get in touch with a professional for more information. So these two forms, the first form is the T2204 EI overpayment. And this is the similar idea to the CPP overpayment. You might have paid too much into EI. You can fill this form out to see if you have an overpayment that you can get back as a refund. And so I will just quickly show off the EI overpayment. This is the T2202 form. I don't have an example of this because I've paid a bit too much into EI this year, and so there is not much I can do here. But again, you can fill this form out to see if you have an overpayment for this year. And then the other form that may be of use to you is the Schedule 9 donations. On a student's income, usually the donations are going to carry forward. I believe this is actually wrong here. I believe this is the amount that you are going to claim for this year. Again, with donations, how it usually works is it's going to match up to the amount of credits you need to break even on your taxes. Usually on a student's income, the tuition you pay is enough to help you break even on your taxes, and so you don't necessarily need to fill out the Schedule 9. However, if you're in a situation where you would fill out the Schedule 9 because you have more donations that you need to, or you have donation amounts that would get you to that tax credit, that would allow you to fill this form out. Again, I would consult with a professional with regards to donations. This is the extent to which I understand the donations process. And also, if you do have donations and you can't claim them, make sure you claim them. Make sure you hold on to the receipts, because you can claim any donations from the previous 5 years. And with that, we make it to the end of the tax forms section. But again, I would like to talk about the two special cases in which they may apply to a Waterloo student. Number one is the U.S. foreign income. This is usually if you get paid in non-Canadian currency. If you worked a foreign job but you were paid in Canadian, ignore the slide. You would just do the exact same process as we have done in the past hour or so. So again, we can go back to the very beginning of the T1 jacket, and if you did say that you held more than $100,000 of money or property in the tax year 2022, then you'll need to fill out the form T1135. And so you will need your tax slip of the W-2 or whatever in order to report the income accordingly. And so I'm going to assume you've received foreign income and benefits. Use the Bank of Canada year-end exchange rates to convert all the amounts to Canadian, and then you would fill out the form accordingly, which honestly I would say is pretty self-explanatory. You're talking about it, first and last name, all that kind of stuff, and you're explaining just exactly where the income's coming from and how much you filled it out. Um, you're really just making sure using this form to ensure that all of the income, foreign income, is declared and accounted for properly. This form does have a deadline. I'm not sure when the deadline is. I believe it's June 15th this year, but don't quote me on that. Again, if you need to fill out this form, I would highly recommend consulting with a professional. And another thing you'll need to note is that you'll still likely need to file taxes for the country you worked in, regardless of payment of currency of payment. And so that is an entire new can of worms that I'm not going to get into. And going from there. And the other special case that we're going to talk about is international students. Taxes are filed based on residency. That means as long as you live in Canada, you need to file Canadian taxes. And yes, I know for international students, you probably don't qualify for CPP and EI. You will still have them deducted from your taxes. And the only way you can get the money back is through overpayment, and that's unfortunately just how it is. However, the easy thing is that there are no additional forms you need to fill out as an international student, and there's really not much of a difference apart from the one that I mentioned at the very beginning of the T1 jacket in how you fill the forms out. You can just follow the workshop the exact same way in order to file your taxes. So we've gotten through the hard part, which is actually filling out the forms. With that said, what happens now? So finally, we can move on to the refund or balance owing. Now that you've completely completed your tax return, you can now send them off for processing. If you're using tax filing software, which I'm going to assume you are, you can e-file your taxes, and the verification is honestly done within minutes, right? That is where you just digitally send your taxes to the CRA, and you can go from there. If you have decided to file your taxes using paper forms or the fillable forms, you can print them out and then, using the old-fashioned way, send them to the CRA. I believe you do need to send your T4 and other slips with you, and we can also see here, for example, that each slip actually has 2 copies for you. This is so that you can keep one, and the other one you can send to the Canada Revenue Agency. And so you can just look up their address of their office on the internet to to send out to the correct spot. The deadline every year for taxes is April 30th of every year. The exception being if April 30th falls on a weekend, then the deadline shifts to the next available Monday. So for example, April 30th this year, 2023, is on a Sunday, so that means you will be able to file your taxes until May 1st, 2023, which is a Monday, and face no penalty. If you are owing a balance, you need to pay the amount off by that date. If you have a refund, technically you're able to file your taxes whenever, like several years after, honestly, but it's best to file your taxes early so you can get your money early. And then finally, it is a good idea to keep your returns handy for up to 6 years after filing. You never know when they might come in handy. Sometimes the CRA screws up, sometimes they need to ask you questions and audit you. If you have your tax returns readily available, it's going to make the process a lot easier. And with that, that concludes the end of this workshop. If there are any questions with regards to taxes, definitely you can send them my way. Generally just for clarification of things that have been said in this workshop. And with that, have a good day.